In this lecture, we're going to learn about the struct keyword. And this is another syntax you can use to create classes in your C++ program. We have seen that we can already use the class keyword to create our classes. I have to break it to you that we can also use struct to do the same. So the syntax here is going to create a class called cat, and it's going to have a member variable called string name. The difference between struct and class is that for classes, members are going to be private by default. And when you do something like this and create class objects, you won't be able to access the name here directly, for example, from the main function. If you do that, you're going to get a compiler error because class members are private by default. But if you use struct, members are going to be public by default, and you will have direct access from the outside. This is the only difference between class and struct. Otherwise, you can use them interchangeably, and they are going to do the same things we have been seeing for classes. They really are the same things. The only difference is that classes are going to have private member variables by default, and struct will have public member variables by default. But we can change these defaults by putting in our own public and private sections inside our class. So for example here, you see that we have changed our dog class to have a public member variable through the public keyword here. And we can do the same for cat. For example, we can put in a public section and a private section, and it's going to behave like classes we have been building so far. One common use we have for struct is when we have to set up classes that only have public member variables. For example, you can need to set up a point model in your C++ program, and you can set up a class like this. You can say struct point, you're going to put in the member variables, and they are going to be directly accessible from the outside. And this is something you will see a lot out there. So this is really all about struct. We're going to head over to Visual Studio Code and play with this a little more. Okay, here we are in our working folder. The current project is struct. We're going to grab our template files and we're going to put them in place. Struct, that's our project here. And we're going to open this in Visual Studio Code. Let's grab struct and drag and drop on top of Visual Studio Code here. This is going to open our folder. We can now open the main CPP file and clean things up a little bit. Okay, so we're going to set up a simple class called dog. We're going to say class dog, and inside we're going to have a member variable called name. It's going to be an std string. Let's say dog name or mname to mean that it is a member variable. This is a syntax you will see a lot in C++ out there. So let's use this from now on. We're going to say mname, and we're going to have another class. Let's put a semicolon. We're going to use struct to set up another one, and it's going to be called dog. Let's call this cat. And we are going to go inside and set up our member variable. We're going to say std string mname, and it's not going to have anything in. So if we create objects of these classes and try to access them, we're going to see the fundamental difference between struct and dog. Let's create a dog, and we're going to say dog1. And we're going to create a cat, and we're going to say cat1. And if we do dog1 and try to access the mname member variable, maybe set it to something else, let's say Fluffy, we're going to have a compiler error because members of a class are private by default, and we can't really do this. So we are trying to access something that is private from the outside. We're going to get a compiler error. Okay, so we have a squiggly line here. But if we try to do the same for cat, it's going to go through because cat is a struct and members of structs are public by default. Let's do that and really show you this. We're going to say cat1 and we're going to say mname and we're going to give it a name, and let's say Johnny. I am making this up. I don't know if there is any cat named Johnny, but we're going to use this. And you're going to see that we don't have any squiggly line. We're going to build and see if GCC is going to take this. It's going to take it. The build is good. We can bring up a terminal and run the program, and we're not going to see anything because we're not printing anything from the main function here. But if we want, we can print this name of our cat. We're going to say stdc out and say cat1 name. And if we build, we're going to see that. So the build should be good. It is good. We can clear and run rooster, and we have Johnny printed out. And this is the name of our cat. And this is really the difference between class and struct. Members of classes are going to be private by default. Members of struct are going to be public by default, but we can change these defaults. For example, let's make everything public. We can do that. No big deal here. And we can move this a little bit to the right so that things are aligned nicely. And we can do the same for struct. Okay, so let's align this. Now, if we do this, we will be able to go in the main function and say dog name and change that. And we're going to be able to see that if we print that out. So let's go down and say stdc out and say dog1 name and print that out. And if we bold now, we're going to see the name of our dog printed out. Okay, bold is good. We can bring this up and clear a little bit and run rooster. We're going to see Fluffy, our dog name, and Johnny, our cat name. So this is really all about classes and struct. They are the same things, but the only difference is the defaults that come with these things. But the common use we have for struct is when we want to set up a class that only has direct member variables, and we don't intend to put methods into that class. A good example of this is the struct of point. So suppose we want to model points in our C++ program. So we can do something like this. And a point is going to have two coordinates, x and y. We're going to say double y. And from this point on, we will be able to create point objects and print them out however we want. So for example, we can go down and say point 1. And from this point, we can go in and say point 1 and say x and assign a value to x. Let's put in a 10. And we're going to go down and say point 1 y. And we're going to give it a value. Let's put in 55.5. Why not? And we can do whatever we want with this point. For example, we can set up a function which is going to print a point. We can do that. Let's say void print point. And we're going to pass the point by value. Or we can even use references because this is going to be an object, const point reference. I think this is going to do. And we're going to go inside and print the information. We're going to say stdc out point. And we're going to put the coordinates in. We're going to say x is going to be point x and y is going to be point y. Why not? And we're going to put in our closing square bracket. And we're going to say stdendl to put a new line character after our print here. Now we can go down and say print point and pass in point 1. And if we do that, we're going to build and we're going to do that through GCC. You see the build is good. Now if we print, we should see the information about our point. And we see point x1, y 55.5. And we see point x is 10, y is 55.5. We can go down and change the information about our point. For example, we can copy this and go down and change x to 40.4 and y to 2.7. Why not? And if we print the information about our point, we're going to see that we have new information and we're going to print point 1. And if we build, we're going to see the new information. So the build is good. We can clear and run rooster. Now you see new information in our point. So this is really the difference between class and struct. The only difference is going to be in the defaults. And struct is mostly useful if you want to set up classes that only have public member variables and you don't really want to use functions or methods in that class. And we have an example of that here. And if you have a case like that, you will use struct. Your code is going to be much easier to read and understand from the perspective of other C++ developers. We are going to stop here in this lecture. In the next one, we're going to learn about the size of objects. Go ahead and finish up here and meet me there.